Montana Territory, August 1876. The sun was barely over the Beartooth Range when Israel Granger saw the smoke. He was riding fence on the north end of his land when the thin column caught his eye, too dark and steady to be a cooking fire. His horse, Clay, shifted beneath him, ears twitching. Israel narrowed his gaze. That smoke was coming from the abandoned Dorsey place, a cabin that had sat quiet and empty since the last freeze. He pulled his hat lower and nudged Clay forward. By the time he reached the clearing, the cabin stood still under the weight of the morning. The door was off its hinges. A wagon sat crooked in the yard, one wheel cracked. A mule stood tied to the porch rail. And then he saw her. She was kneeling beside the fire pit, trying to coax a flame from damp wood. Her clothes were road-worn and dusty, her boots scuffed, and her braid hung loose over one shoulder. A little boy, maybe 5 or 6, leaned against her arm. Israel dismounted slow, hands visible. "Ma'am." She looked up with a start, eyes wide and wary. The boy clung to her tighter. "I do not mean trouble," Israel said. "Just saw the smoke." She stood, brushing her skirt. "We are not staying long," she said, voice low but steady. "Just needed to rest. My boy was sick." Israel glanced at the child. Pale, thin, eyes rimmed red. He looked back at her. "You by yourself?" She hesitated. "Yes." "Name's Israel Granger. My ranch is 20 minutes south. Do you need food? Medicine?" She blinked, like she had not expected kindness. "I am Faye Fletcher. This is my son, Bram." Israel nodded to the boy. "Howdy, Bram." The boy hid behind his mother's skirt. Faye's voice softened. "He lost his sister last winter. Fever." Israel's jaw tensed. "I am sorry." Faye's eyes glistened. She turned away, crouched again by the fire, but her hands shook. Israel stepped closer. "Let me get you both something warm. You can come back with me. Got clean water, food, a doctor that rides out once a week." Faye looked up. "We do not take charity. It ain't charity if it is offered with both hands." She studied him, silent for long seconds. Then she stood, nodded once. "We will come." His cabin sat between 2 cottonwoods, wind whispering through their leaves. It was plain, but solid. Inside, he stoked the hearth and set stew to warm, while Faye helped Bram wash his face and hands. She moved quiet, like someone used to being overlooked. Israel caught himself watching her more than once, the way she touched her boy's hair, how she kept her back straight even when tired. She had a strength in her that did not shout. "Where were you headed?" he asked over supper. "Nowhere in particular," she said. "Just away." Israel nodded. He had known that kind of running. He had done it himself once after his brother died in Kansas, after the war ended, and all he had left was a saddle and time. He poured her a cup of coffee. "You can stay as long as you need. I got room." Faye hesitated. "Thank you." That night, he set Bram up in the smaller room and gave Faye his own. He took the cot near the fire without protest. When the cabin went quiet, he lay awake, listening to the wind and the boy's soft breathing. He thought of how thin they both looked, how proud she was, how tired. He thought about the way her eyes had lit up just a little when Bram smiled at the stew. And he thought about how long it had been since something felt like it might belong to him. By the end of the week, Bram was stronger. He followed Israel around the yard, asking quiet questions about the chickens, the horses, the windmill. Faye offered to help clean, cook, even mend one of his shirts. She never asked for anything. Israel watched her one morning, standing in the sunlight with her sleeves rolled up, showing Bram how to knead dough. He had never seen anything as steadying as that picture. She looked up and caught him staring. Her lips curved, small and shy. It was the first time she had smiled at him. Israel's chest ached like it had been kicked by a mule. They stayed. A week turned into 2, then 3. Faye never said it outright, but she began to move like someone home again. She planted wildflowers near the cabin. She let Bram feed the chickens. She patched up the curtains. Israel built a new room onto the back of the house. He told her it was for Bram, but he knew it was more than that. He wanted them to stay, not just pass through. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky went gold, he brought her out to the porch. "Faye," he said, voice low, "I know you have seen hard things, and I am no man to rush what is not ready, but I need you to know something." She looked up at him, quiet. He stepped closer. "That smile you gave me the other day, I have waited my whole life for it. I think I started building this place for you before I ever knew your name." Faye's eyes shone, But she did not look away. I know we are not young, he went on. But I would give you every day I have left. She reached out slowly, touched his hand. Israel, I did not think I would ever feel safe again. But here, with you, I do. He turned his palm to hold hers fully. And just like that, something settled between them, quiet and sure, like a door opening, like hope, like love just beginning. The first frost came early that year, curling white along the fence posts and stiffening the creek behind the barn. Israel rose before the light, as always, and found Faye already up, wrapping Bram in a blanket near the hearth. He gets cold easy, she said, not turning. Israel knelt beside the stove and stoked the fire until it caught. We'll get him a coat from town. We'll lined. Faye hesitated. I can sew something from the quilt we brought. There's still enough of it left. He didn't answer that. Just set water to boil and poured cornmeal into the pan. Behind him, Bram sniffled and tucked his feet under him, small and quiet. Later, with Bram bundled and dozing in the corner, Israel saddled Clay. I'll go to Livingston, he said, adjusting the cinch. Be back before dusk. Faye stood on the porch, arms crossed against the cold. There's no need to spend on us, I want to, he said, looking up at her. Don't argue with me on this. She studied him a moment, then gave the smallest nod. Bring back flour, if you can. And matches were nearly out. He added those to memory and mounted up. As he rode out, he glanced back once. She was still there, watching him ride into the pale morning. Livingston was quiet in late autumn, the wind sweeping through Main Street with a dry, hollow sound. Israel traded for supplies, a coat just small enough to fit Bram, salt pork, and a bolt of dark blue calico he hadn't planned to buy until he saw it. It reminded him of the color she wore that first night. He tied the bundle tight and turned homeward, the sun already slipping behind the Absaricus. By the time he returned, dusk had settled thick across the land. The cabin glowed warm through the windows. Inside, Faye was kneading dough, sleeves rolled above her wrists. She looked up when he entered and froze when she saw the fabric. I thought you might like it, he said, setting the bolt on the table. She touched it with the tips of her fingers. It's beautiful. Israel held up the coat. Try this on Bram. She called him over, lifting him into her lap and pulling the sleeves around his arms. He beamed, touched the buttons like they were gold. You spoil him, she said quietly. He's a good boy. Faye's hand stilled on the collar. He hasn't laughed like this since before Missouri. Israel handed her the matches, then stepped aside to hang his coat. When he turned back, she was looking at him in a way she hadn't before, not with surprise or caution, but something quieter, a kind of wondering. I was married once, she said, voice low. He was a blacksmith. Went out to help a neighbor shoe a mare, never made it home. A tree came down in a windstorm. Bram was too. Israel nodded, his hand still. My brother died outside Lawrence. He was all I had left. I spent 3 years sleeping on a bedroll under the stars because I couldn't stand the sound of walls. Faye folded the calico and set it aside. Then why build this place? He looked at her. Because eventually, a man gets tired of only surviving. He wants something worth waking up to. She didn't say anything for a long time. The only sound was Bram humming under his breath, running his fingers along the coat seams. That night, after the boy was asleep, Israel stepped outside. The stars were sharp and cold above him. A minute later, the door creaked and Faye stepped out beside him, shawl wrapped around her shoulders. I've been thinking, she said, eyes on the sky. He waited. I always believed I'd carry my grief until I died. Just keep moving until it wore itself out. He glanced at her. But you don't move like a man waiting to forget. You move like someone waiting to be known. Israel's throat tightened. I've got nothing fancy to offer. Just land, and quiet, and work. But it's yours if you want it. She looked at him, moonlight catching the curve of her cheek. You've already given us more than I know how to carry. I'm not asking for thanks. I know, she whispered. That's what makes it feel like home. Then she reached for his hand. Not uncertain, not afraid, just steady. And Israel, who had lived through war and lonesomeness and years of dust and silence, closed his fingers around hers and felt, for the first time in a long while, that the waiting had been worth it. The first snow came in the night, quiet as breath. Israel rose to white light slipping through the window slats, the kind that pressed soft against the floorboards and made the world feel hushed. His boots left prints across the threshold as he stepped outside to check the livestock. He didn't bother waking Faye. She had been up past midnight sewing by lamplight, and he'd seen how her shoulders slumped when she thought no one noticed. The cold bit his cheeks as he walked the pasture. The cows were huddled near the far fence, steam rising from their hides. He spread hay, checked the troughs, and paused near the barn. There was a sound light, muffled. He turned. Faye stood at the edge of the yard, coat tied tight, Bram bundled against her hip. She didn't wave, just watched him, her expression unreadable. Later, with the stove warming the cabin and Bram playing on the rug with a carved horse Israel had whittled last week, Faye sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a tin mug. "I was thinking," she said, "of staying through spring." Israel looked up from the ledger he'd been marking. "You'd be welcome." She nodded, but her gaze lingered on the window. "It's not just the weather." Bram started asking about things again. What trees are called? Why the sky changes? He didn't for a long while. Israel set the pencil down. "That's good, Faye. I think he's healing," she said. Then after a beat, "I think I am too." A silence passed, comfortable, not heavy. "I've been thinking too," he said, "about adding a few more hens come thaw. Maybe a second milk cow." Her eyes shifted back to him. "That'd mean more work." "I know," he said. "I'd like that." Faye looked at her hands. "I don't know if I remember how to belong somewhere. I was a wife once. After that, I just became someone who left. You've been here nearly 2 months. You haven't left yet." She didn't look at him then, but her voice was steady. "I want to build something again. Something that doesn't vanish when the wind changes." Israel leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Then let's build it." Outside, Bram's horse clattered across the floor. He laughed, bright and sudden. Faye closed her eyes. "He's memorized the sound of your boots. He runs to the door when he hears them." "I have too," Israel said quietly. She opened her eyes, met his, and this time she didn't look away. That evening, she brought out her old tin box, the one she'd kept tucked in her trunk, never opened. Inside were scraps of ribbon, a broken brooch, and a folded letter, worn at the creases. She laid it on the table without explanation. Israel unfolded it slowly. The paper was thin, ink faded. "He wrote that after Bram was born," she said. "He said fatherhood made him quieter, that he didn't expect to feel so much." Israel read the last lines twice. "He was a good man," he said. Faye nodded. "He was. But I don't think I ever knew what it meant to be chosen. Not like this." Israel folded the letter and slid it back into the tin. "You are," he said. "You've been, every day since you stepped into the clearing." She reached across the table and touched the edge of his sleeve. "I'm not a woman who loves quickly. I'm not a man who asks for much," he said. "Only what's real." She didn't speak after that, just stood, moved to the hearth, and began setting the table for supper. But the way she moved, without the careful distance she'd always held, told him something had shifted. That night, after Bram was asleep, she didn't go to her room. She sat beside him near the fire, her sewing basket untouched, her hands resting quietly in her lap. "I used to be afraid I'd forget the sound of his voice," she said after a long silence. "But I don't anymore. I remember it without hurting." Israel didn't answer. He just waited, like he always did when something was still forming in her. When she finally looked at him, there was no hesitation. "I want to stay. Not just through spring. For good." He swallowed hard. "You sure?" She nodded. "I've seen what leaving feels like. I want to know what staying does." Israel reached for her hand, slow, like the first time, but this time she met him halfway. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft against the roof. Inside, the warmth held steady. And for the first time in years, Israel didn't feel like he was waiting anymore. He was home. By late December, the wind had settled into the bones of the valley, low and constant. Snow packed tight along the fence lines, and the sky hung low most days, gray as tin. Israel kept the barn warm with extra straw, and Faye started lighting the kitchen lamp early, so the light would be waiting when Bram came in from gathering kindling with his little mittens soaked through. That morning, Bram sat on a stool near the stove, swinging his legs while Israel dried his socks by the fire. "Do deer sleep standing up?" he asked, watching the flames. "I don't reckon they do," Israel said, turning the sock, "though they're quiet enough that it's hard to tell." Faye was mending a tear in one of Bram's shirts at the table, her needle moving quick and even. I saw one once, she said, not looking up. Back in Illinois, near a stream. It just stood there, still as breath. I thought it might be made of smoke. Israel glanced over. You never said you were from Illinois. I was born near Peoria, she said. My folks had a small orchard. Apples, mostly. He leaned back in the chair. What happened to it? She paused, then set the needle down. They passed the year I married. There wasn't much left to keep me. We sold the land to a neighbor. Bram had curled against the stove, the heat pulling sleep from his limbs. Israel lowered his voice. You ever think about planting trees again? Faye brushed a lock of hair from her cheek. Sometimes. But trees take time. Years, even. You have to believe you'll still be there when they bear fruit. Maybe that's the point, he said. Maybe planting them is the promise. She looked at him in a way that felt like the room had just gone still. Would you plant one with me? He didn't look away. I'd plant a whole grove. The next morning, while Bram napped under a quilt, Israel cleared space in the lean-to for shelves. Faye had quietly begun drying herbs, wild mint, horehound, a bit of dried yarrow she'd gathered near the creek. She hadn't said why, but he knew enough to leave her to it. She moved with purpose now, with the comfort of someone who no longer needed to ask permission to shape the space around her. That evening, he found her outside, sitting on the porch step, her hands wrapped around a small tin box he hadn't seen before. Her eyes were dry, but her mouth was drawn in thought. I thought I'd forgotten what he looked like, she said when he joined her. My husband. But today I remembered. Not his face, exactly just the way he used to roll his sleeves. He'd always do it before lifting anything heavy. Israel sat beside her. Memories come back like that. Bits and pieces. She looked toward the tree line. I don't want Bram to forget his sister. But I worry sometimes he'll only remember the sick days. He won't, Israel said. Not if there's enough good to balance it. She turned to him, her voice quieter. Do you think it's wrong? Loving again? No, he said. I think it's brave. A silence passed. Not heavy, just full. Then Faye reached into the tin and pulled out a small sketch of child's drawing, folded soft at the corners. She made this the week before, she said. Said it was our house. She drew it with flowers in the yard, even though there weren't any. Said she'd plant them when it got warm. Israel took the paper, careful not to crease it further. Then we'll plant them, just like she planned. Faye didn't cry, but she leaned into him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, firm and sure. She stayed there until the last of the light faded. Later, after Bram had been tucked in and the fire banked low, Faye stood by the window, her silhouette framed in orange glow. I used to think love was something that happened once, she said, her voice steady. And after that, you just lived with the memory. But it's not. It's something you can give again. Grow again. Israel stepped behind her, close but not touching. You're not alone in this, Faye. Not anymore. She turned then, slow, and her gaze found his without hesitation. I don't want to wait until spring, she said. I want to build this now. With you. He met her eyes. Then let's start tomorrow. And when she pressed her hand to his chest, just over his heart, she smiled for the second time that winter, wider, rooted, unguarded. Israel had waited his whole life for that smile. Now, he didn't have to wait anymore. The last week of February brought a thaw that softened the snowpack along the south edges of the barn. Water ran in quiet rivulets under the eaves, and the first pale shoots of grass pushed tentative green through the ice-hardened ground. Israel stood near the paddock, sleeves rolled to his elbows, watching the mud loosen beneath his boots. The air smelled faintly of turned earth and smoke from the morning's fire. Behind him, Faye came down the porch steps with a tin pail. Thought I'd try that bread recipe you mentioned, she said, glancing at the sky. If the oven holds steady. It'll hold, Israel said. Stove's temperamental, but not mean-spirited. She smiled, eyes narrowed against the sun, then walked toward the chicken coop where Bram was crouched, intent on collecting the last 3 eggs without cracking them. Faye knelt beside him, steadying his hand as he reached. Israel watched them for a moment longer, then turned back to the corral. The gelding they'd taken in midwinter had started limping 2 days ago. Israel ran his hand along the animal's leg, frowning at the heat swelling near the joint. He'd have to wrap it tonight, maybe ride out for the vet if it worsened. He didn't look up until he heard Faye's footsteps approaching behind him. We'll need more flour if I'm to keep baking, she said, setting the pail down. And Bram's boots are tight. I'll ride into Shields Valley tomorrow, Israel said. Should be back by sundown. Faye grew quiet, arms folded across her chest. I never liked sending a man off, she admitted. Not after Missouri. Even on errands. I always come back, he said, voice low. She nodded, slow. I know. Doesn't mean I don't feel it. He stepped closer, brushing a streak of mud from her sleeve. Would it help if I taught you to ride proper? She blinked. You think I can't? I think you've never had a horse that listened. Her mouth curved. Maybe I'll take you up on that. That night, after Bram fell asleep with his cheek pressed to the corner of the quilt, Israel poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to Faye. She took it wordlessly, settling beside him on the bench near the hearth. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the floor. I've been thinking about the land north of the creek, she said. The soil's darker there. I could start a garden when the frost lifts. He turned toward her, the mug warm in his hands. What would you plant? Beans, maybe. Squash. I'd like to try rhubarb if the roots take. You'll need help fencing it. I thought I'd ask you, she said, gaze steady. You don't have to ask me. I'm yours. The words landed with a softness that settled deep. She didn't speak, just reached across and touched his jaw with her fingertips. It was the first time she'd done that, not in comfort, not in farewell, but simply to be close. I thought I might want to marry again someday, she said. But I never imagined I'd want it like this, with quiet mornings and muddy boots and a man who listens more than he talks. Israel took her hand in his. We can stand in the pasture or in front of a preacher, Faye. Makes no difference to me, long as it's you beside me. She didn't answer in words, just leaned in and rested her head against his shoulder. They sat like that until the fire burned to coals. The wedding came 3 weeks later, held on the first clear day of March. The preacher rode in from Paradise Valley, boots dusty and voice rough with the road. Bram wore a clean shirt tucked too high and held onto Faye's skirt with one hand. Israel had shaved, though not clean, just enough to show he'd tried. The vows were short. No one cried, though Faye's hand trembled once when she slipped the ring onto Israel's finger. Afterward, they ate bread and smoked trout at the table, and Bram laughed so hard at something Israel said that he dropped his cup. No one minded the spill. That night, when the last of the lamplight faded and the house fell still, Israel lay beside Faye with her hand tucked under his. The wind moved gently through the cottonwoods outside, and from the far room came the rhythm of their son's breathing. You're warm, she murmured. So are you, he said. Always have been. She didn't reply, but the way she curled closer answered everything. Years passed. Faye's garden grew wide and stubborn, just like she had. By the second summer, she was selling preserves to the store in town, jars lined with scraps of calico and labeled in Bram's careful hand. Israel added a second barn and took on 2 more horses. He never said it, but Faye knew he named one after her, quiet, sure-footed, and strong enough to carry a man home in the dark. Bram grew tall. He whittled like Israel and baked like Faye. When he asked about his sister, Faye showed him the drawing again and told him the flowers by the porch were hers. He watered them every morning, even when he was nearly grown. On warm evenings, Israel and Faye sat on the porch, their chairs side by side. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. Sometimes she reached for his hand, and he always gave it. She never asked again if love after loss was right. She knew. It lived in the way he watched her stir the pot, in the sound of his footsteps returning each time he left, in the steadiness of his presence through every season. They built a life that didn't ask for more than it needed and gave more than it promised. And they were happy. Not the kind that burns fast and fades, but the kind that roots deep and holds on through snow and drought and time. They had each other, and it was enough.